The discovery of a new energy ore, called somnium, caused conflict between the two industrial cities of the northern and southern parts of Patria. The dispute erupted into a civil war, splitting the nation of Patria into the Northern Union of Patria and the Southern Confederation of Patria. Out of fear of losing the war, the Northern Union used forbidden technology to create monster-like soldiers, giving them god-like abilities. Their destructive powers and ability to overrun the battlefield changed the tides of the war, giving the North an upper hand in the war. These soldiers are called incarnates. The story starts on a battlefield where the North tries to attack a fortified stronghold held by the South, but they are outnumbered and take heavy casualties. Just as it seems they are about to lose the battle, a unit of soldiers makes their appearance. These soldiers transform into mythical beasts and dominate the battlefield, destroying the enemies and easily capturing the fortress. Hank and his childhood friends, Kane and Elaine, are the leaders of the Incarnates. The Incarnates goes on to dominate more battlefields, helping the North to achieve many victories. However, there is a problem. Each time the Incarnates transform into beasts, they find it difficult to fully revert back to their human form. One day, an incarnate named Abby goes berserk and attacks both the captured prisoners and allies. Because of his rampage, the troops shoot at him. Regretting his actions, Abby kills himself. This worries the other incarnates as they fear they might one day end up like Abby. Elaine recalls when Abby complained about being confused about his identity whenever he fought in his transformed state, because his powers were beginning to take over his mind. During Abby's send-off, Hank reveals that what happened to Abby might also happen to them, and he makes them swear an oath that before they completely lose their minds and go berserk, they as incarnates should be slain by their own, to make sure that their fighting wasn't for nothing. After several weeks of tedious battles and many lose of their comrades, it's finally time to march to the southern capital and claim it, which would spell the end of the war. But Hank notices his comrades' lack of morale, and he tells them that he wants them to celebrate with him after the war, because he plans to marry Elaine. This gets them excited as they all wish for him to be with her. Later that evening, Elaine pulls Hank outside and tells him that the war is already ending as the North and South are negotiating a peace treaty. Hank feels relieved, but she further explains to him that the incarnates will get disposed of because the government fears their power and shoots him with a god-killer bullet that paralyzes him. It's a bullet that was specially designed to kill incarnates. Elaine says that the incarnates will eventually lose their humanity to the beasts within them, including Hank, and when that happens, the incarnates will become the greatest threat to the country. So the only way to prevent it from happening is to kill them. She believes it's her duty since she was the one that created them in the first place. Kane was also in on the plan. She gives him a gun to help her kill the rest of the incarnates. However, Kane has other plans and shoots her with the gun. Unwilling to give up his power, he starts laughing hysterically. The scene shifts to 2 months later. Hank wakes up in a military hospital where he meets 2nd Lieutenant Lisa Renekassel, who works for the Patria Union Intelligence. Lisa tells him that he was found on the verge of death. Elaine's body disappeared and Kane disbanded the incarnates. Most of them lost their minds and wreaked havoc wherever they went. She informs him that Kane and Elaine have been missing since then. Recalling his childhood friend's betrayal, Hank angrily hits the wall. He then decides to go on a quest to fulfill the oath made by his former squad. Spear in hand, he travels around killing the incarnates that have lost their sanity, starting with his old friend Eddie. Eddie tells him that they have become gods thanks to their powers, and there's nothing wrong with killing humans. Hank disagrees and tells him that they are not gods and there is no place for them in this world, especially since they have lost their humanity. Hank kills Eddie by throwing the spear at him and detonating the bomb attached to it. Next on his list was Mr. William Bancroft, a family man who manages an orphanage with his daughter, Shawl. Bancroft had reluctantly joined the war in exchange for the government protecting his daughter and the orphanage. When he returned as an incarnate, unable to revert to his human form, his children and the town welcomed him. However, Hank has to kill him to prevent any harm to the people because he occasionally goes on a rampage and kills the livestock. Shawl witnessed her father's death and vowed to track down and kill Hank. As she embarks on her mission, Shawl locates Hank in a bar and shoots him with an ordinary bullet. It doesn't harm Hank because normal bullets cannot kill an incarnate. He carries her away and interrogates her. She tells him that she is William Bancroft's daughter. As he continues to interrogate her, another incarnate named Danny appears. He tells Shawl to stay back as he confronts Danny, who kills merchants after stealing their jewelry. Hank reminds Danny about the oath they swore back then. However, Shawl goes between them, trying to stop Hank from killing his former comrade. A fierce battle begins as Danny transforms into his beast form and starts attacking Hank. Hank manages to pierce Danny with a bomb spear, triggering the explosion as he jumps away. Danny transforms back and explains that he only joined the war to provide for his poor mother in the village. Hank reluctantly finishes him up with the God Killer bullet. Even though his actions weigh heavily on him emotionally, he still needs to fulfill the oath. Shawl decides to join Hank on his beast hunting quest, to understand the reason why he must kill his former comrades and why her father had to die. Several days later, Hank and Shawl arrived at Rouge Hill, a town terrorized by another incarnate named Minotaur. Unfortunately, Minotaur had built a fortress from the remains of the town's residents' houses, making it a formidable stronghold. Upon their arrival, they encountered Lisa, who introduced herself to Shawl. Lisa showed Hank the devastating impact Minotaur had on the residents who had lost their homes, and they needed to put an end to Minotaur's madness. That night, Hank and Shawl ventured into the fortress to confront Minotaur. As they entered, Shawl discovered traps set by the Incarnate to kill anyone attempting to breach the fortress. Terrified, she tripped and triggered a spinning blade that almost sliced her in half, but Hank saved her with his spear. Hank then instructed Shawl to stay back, continuing the mission alone. Lisa takes Shawl back, but she insisted on seeing Hank. With Lisa's help, they opened a barrier and witnessed Hank's battle with Minotaur. However, Minotaur triggered deadly traps to defeat Hank. Shawl and Lisa rushed to the scene, finding Hank seemingly unconscious. Just as Minotaur prepared to finish Hank, Hank transformed into his incarnate form. In the fierce battle, Hank uses Minotaur's traps to his advantage, and eventually defeats him by piercing his neck and administering the God-Killer bullet, causing Minotaur's demise. This turned into weeks as Hank and Shawl continued their relentless pursuit of incarnates. Hank and Shawl embark on a train journey through the countryside. However, their plans come to a halt when Lisa stops the train to inform Hank about another incarnate named the Behemoth, a former comrade of Hank whose name is Artie. Surprisingly, this particular incarnate is believed to be benevolent. The issue arises when they learn that the Behemoth is headed directly for the recently constructed Bridge of Peace, a monumental structure that connects the once divided lands of the North and South. Having gathered the necessary information, Hank shares his plan with the group, informing them of the Behemoth's formidable strength. Despite the odds, he assures them that there is a way to stop the beast, and they eagerly await the arrival of the Behemoth, following Hank's plan to weaken and immobilize the creature. Once it appears, they unleash a relentless barrage of attacks, successfully incapacitating the colossal creature. The next day, the builders of the bridge express their frustration at the length of time it took to defeat the Behemoth. Shawl, however, attempts to persuade Hank to spare the Behemoth's life. Unfortunately, their peaceful conversation is abruptly interrupted by explosive events that further enrage the already agitated Behemoth. In response, Hank transforms into a werewolf once again to confront the furious incarnate. Despite a series of intense assaults, the Behemoth relentlessly advanced towards the bridge, fueled by an unquenchable desire to see the ocean. They eventually manage to fatally injure the monster. However, the Behemoth refuses to give up and continues to inch determinedly toward the bridge, despite sustaining significant damage. Suddenly, a part of the cliff collapses, revealing a breathtaking view of the ocean. Strangely, Artie, a man of few words, possesses an intense desire to see the ocean. Tears welled in his eyes as soon as he catches sight of the vast expanse of water. The Behemoth succumbs to its wounds and dies. Amidst the aftermath, Officer Lisa approaches Hank with news of Kane, that his whereabouts have been traced to White Church, the city of steam. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the town of White Church, Hank and Shawl found themselves embroiled in a hunt that delved deeper into the heart of darkness than they could have ever imagined. Arriving in town, they were greeted by the eerie silence of its streets, where whispers of fear echoed through the alleys. Nightfall descended, and Hank retired to his quarters, his thoughts consumed by the elusive figure of Kane. Meanwhile, Shawl kept a vigilant watch, her mind racing with questions about her father's involvement with the Incarnates, and the true nature of their quest. At midnight, the Gargoyle Incarnate strikes again. This time, a young boy named Andy witnessed the horror. Dawn broke with news of another victim claimed by the Gargoyle's relentless rampage. Andy confesses that he saw the killer escape to an old church. Hearing this, Lisa tries to interrogate the kid, but he runs off. Shawl goes after the kid and tries to talk to him, but ends up getting targeted by the Gargoyle. However, Hank arrives in time to save her. Later that evening, Hank and Shawl set out to confront the Gargoyle responsible for the town's terror. They met Topher, the incarnate they sought. The air crackled with tension as the former comrades faced off in a battle that would determine the fate of the town. Hank transforms to his werewolf form, but Topher shot him with a God Killer bullet, which caused him to revert back to his human form. Topher carries him high to finish him off. However, salvation came from an unexpected source in the form of Andy's bravery. Armed with Shaw's gun, the young boy fires at the incarnate, but it has no effect, and this only enrages the gargoyle, and he kicks Andy off his feet. As he tries to kill both Shaw and Andy, Hank desperately removes the bullet and unleashes his full fury upon the gargoyle. With a primal roar, he struck a fatal blow, piercing through the gargoyle's chest and ending Topher's reign of terror once and for all. However, victory came at a cost, as Shaw hurriedly makes her way to meet Hank. She realizes that she's become entangled in some threads. Kane shows up and explains to Hank that the God-Killer bullet was intended to be a symbol of their reunion. Elizabeth, a spider incarnate who had captured Shaw, puts her to sleep while Kane sends Magliglia to invite Hank to a party the next day. Kane promises to return Shaw once Hank shows up at the party. As Kane and Shaw leave, Hank collapses to the ground. Later, Hank wakes up distressed, realizing he had been trapped in a nightmare where Kane shoots Elaine. The sight of Shaw's rifle knocks him back to reality. Andy arrives on the scene and demands to know who is responsible for Shaw's kidnapping. Hank assures Andy that he will save Shaw. Meanwhile, Captain Claude's squad arrives in White Church and examines the bodies. Captain Claude identifies Kane and assigns Lisa to investigate a mansion linked to one of the victims. Hank attends the party, which is packed with royals who support Kane. However, things take a dark turn as the incarnates walk into the room and go on a killing spree, murdering everyone at the event. Kane opposes Hank and Elaine's belief that incarnates should die, claiming that humans have lost their humanity, so why fight to save them? He orders the incarnates to attack Hank. Despite Hank's valiant efforts to defend himself, he is quickly overwhelmed by the sheer number of incarnates. Fortunately, Captain Claude's soldiers arrive with their advanced technology and manage to capture some incarnates. Hank continues to fight the other incarnates while Claude attempts to confront Kane. However, Claude is unable to reach Kane and Hank comes to Claude's aid by defeating an incarnate that was about to kill him. Hank strives to reach Kane, but two other incarnates block his path. Kane taunts Hank, claiming that he is powerless to stop him. Suddenly, Claude fires a cannon at Kane, causing a serious injury. Witnessing this, Hank leaps into the air and hurls a spear bomb at Kane's face, detonating it. As the smoke dissipates, everyone witnesses Kane's lower half still standing, while the upper half, which had been completely blown off, regenerates. Turns out that Kane, also known as the Vampire Incarnate, is an immortal. Kane invites Hank to join him once again as his comrade, but Hank refuses. At Kane's command, Elizabeth brings Shaw forward. Seeing this, Hank tries to intervene as Kane takes aim at Shaw with a gun, but the other incarnates prevent him from doing so. In a desperate move, Hank transforms into a werewolf and pushes the incarnates away. He charges towards Kane, but Elizabeth captures him in her webs, forcing him to watch as Kane shoots Shaw. This triggers Hank's memories of losing Elaine, causing him to transform into a giant white wolf. Kane claims that the massive wolf is Hank's true form and declares him the king of beasts, asserting that no one can control him. Hank unleashes chaos in the town as he rampages through it. Eventually, Hank vanishes, leaving White Church in ruins. Shaw survived the devastation wrought by Hank, witnessing firsthand the destruction that followed in the wake of his actions. The news of White Church's obliteration sent shockwaves throughout the nation, leaving wounds that would not easily heal. However, the turmoil was far from over. 2 weeks later, another seismic shift occurred as Kane and his fellow incarnates, bolstered by soldiers and nobles, announced the formation of a new state. The land west of Patria, separated by a mountain range, a patria where incarnates would be elevated to the status of revered deities. This declaration ignited a conflict, as the government was concerned the remaining incarnates would ally with the rebels. The patria government gears up for war against both the incarnates and those who oppose their rule. After a few months of absence, Shaw returned to her hometown, greeted by wary eyes. Her survival was attributed to the peculiar dress she wore, crafted from Elizabeth's thread, a mystery that continued to perplex her. Learning that Hank had been stripped of his rank and was being pursued by the military, Shaw found herself caught in a whirlwind of thoughts. After visiting her father's grave, she encounters Lisa and Claude in her town. Shaw sought to join their mission to apprehend an incarnate lurking in the mountains. With Lisa's endorsement, Claude granted her request, as she knows the area better than them, and they ventured forth into the forest. As night fell, they camped in the mountains, where Claude expressed regret over their failure to save Shaw during the White Church incident. He apologizes to her, revealing his status as a major and the son of the president of Patria. Claude vowed to eradicate all incarnates with his squad. Coup de grace. Their conversation was shattered by the appearance of a dragon incarnate, whom Shawl recognizes as her father, William Bancroft, and his appearance had rotted to the point of not being human. The ensuing confrontation tested their resolve, with Claude ordering his squad to subdue the Incarnate, but their firepower proved insufficient. As they engaged the dragon also known as the Nidhogg Incarnate, Shawl grappled with conflicting emotions, torn between her love for her father and the necessity of stopping him to protect others. She calls out to him, but Claude saves her as the Nidhogg swings his tail in an attempt to attack her. The squad continues shooting at the Incarnate, making it back off. Lisa advises Shawl to leave, but she opts to fight. Armed with God-killer bullets provided by Lisa, Shawl joined the fray, determined to end her father's rampage. They commence their attack on the Nidhogg, firing several bullets at it. In retaliation, he flies toward the town to destroy it. Claude asks Shawl and Lisa to rush to the town and evacuate the people. Despite initial setbacks, they manage to cripple its wings, but he retaliates by shooting fireballs at them. Shawl and Lisa warn the villagers to flee for their lives, but those fools wouldn't listen and just stood there, deaf to the impending danger, until Nidhogg's fiery wrath descended upon their pathetic little village. Shawl, finally grasping why Hank had to kill her father and all the Incarnates in the first place, resolves to end her father's rampage. In a heart-wrenching moment, she delivered the fatal shots. In a fleeting moment of clarity, Nidhogg's mind clears as he regains his sanity. With a heavy heart, he reached out to Shawl, bidding his final farewells to his daughter before passing away peacefully. Although Shawl was devastated, she found some comfort in the fact that she could free her father and bid him farewell. Shawl was determined that she would find other ways to save the Incarnates without killing them and to find Hank and support him. With her resolve strengthened, she requested to accompany Claude and Lisa on their mission to find Hank. Claude, recognizing her potential value to their cause, seeing the significance of her involvement, he grants her request. The president issues a decree for the eradication of all Incarnates within a mere 3 months. Meanwhile, Claus and his soldiers bide their time by the seaside, awaiting the arrival of a crucial supply ship. Claude, restless and frustrated by the delay, broods over the impending challenges. Amidst this tension, Shawl finds solace in the ocean's serene expanse, her thoughts drifting to Hank, until a distant melody interrupts her thoughts. Intrigued, she follows the beautiful song to a nearby cave, where she encounters Trice, an Incarnate with the captivating voice of a siren. She was enjoying the song when Charles, a wary guardian of Trice, intervenes, holding Shawl at gunpoint. He ordered Shawl to leave the cave. However, Trice pleads to Charles not to harm Shawl. Charles warns Trice that she should stop singing because the people in town are looking for her. Shawl discloses her identity as Will's daughter before they engage in a conversation. Charles apologizes to Shawl and explains his motive to protect Trice from the townsfolk due to the government's mandate to exterminate Incarnates. He fears that the bounty on Trice's head will incentivize people to betray her. Trice reveals her past as a once celebrated singer turned soldier. She describes how she was a singer at Charles' bar, but the war stripped her song of its value, leading her to use her voice as a weapon during her time in the army. However, upon returning, society still viewed her and her fellow Incarnates as monsters, shunning her music. This rejection forced her into hiding until Charles discovered her. Though Charles urges caution, Trice longs to emerge from seclusion, a desire Shawl supports. Promising to visit her regularly, Shawl shares moments of companionship with Trice, discussing Hank and nurturing her dream of performing once more. Despite the dangers, Shawl reassures Trice that brighter days lie ahead. Upon returning to camp, Shawl encounters Claude, who warns her against aimless wandering due to the town's wariness of soldiers. Their conversation reveals Claude as Cain's younger brother and his duty to eliminate both Cain and the other Incarnates. Yet, tragedy strikes when Charles plays the piano alone in his tavern as he recalls the time when Trice was a singer for him. But he is confronted by several men in town with rifles who ask him if he is hiding Trice. He struggles with them, which eventually led to him getting shot. Trice hears Charles come in and mentions her intention to depart from the town until she can be welcomed back, only to tragically discover him fatally wounded. Charles encourages her to flee. Before passing, he begged Trice not to blame the townspeople, understanding the townspeople's fear of war and an uncertain future. That night, Trice's haunting song lulls the townspeople into a deep slumber, drawing Claude's attention. Despite his efforts to resist, Claude succumbs to Trice's melody, leaving him vulnerable. Shawl intervenes, questioning Trice's actions and pleading for her to stop. Trice explains that she believes she's saving people from a future filled with pain. However, Shawl challenges her actions, noting that they seem out of character for Trice. This prompts Trice to regain her composure. Suddenly, Claude intervenes, shooting at Trice, who flees into the night sky with Shawl in pursuit. Finding refuge at Charles' bar that has been burnt down, Trice reveals her anguish at being perceived as a monster, incapable of reclaiming her beloved stage. Despite this, she musters the courage to ask Shawl if she would be willing to listen to her sing once more. With Shawl's encouragement, Trice prepares to perform, only to be struck down by Claude's soldiers. As Claude commands the soldiers to finish Trice, Shawl rushes to her side. In a bold move, Shawl implored Claude to permit Trice to perform her final song, assuring him that it posed no threat. At Shawl's insistence, Trice concluded her melody, and Shawl commended her for its beauty. With a sense of peace, Trice peacefully passed away. As Trice passes on, Shawl acknowledges the beauty of her performance, honoring the memory of a soul lost in the turmoil of war. The ship arrives and they prepare to leave. Claude meets Shawl and tells her that he will shoot through her if she interferes with his mission again. He also added that some of his men have found traces of Hank in the center snowy mountains. Shawl explains that Trice is her friend and she wanted to do anything to save her and Hank's, even if it would cost her her life to protect Hank. Meanwhile, Hank, who vanished after the chaos of White Church's destruction, resurfaces in the snowy mountains, confronting a small group of incarnates. Despite his determination to honor their oath, Hank is haunted by memories of the devastation he wrought as the King of Beasts, leaving him no choice but to resort to explosives to defeat the incarnate opposing him. Once Hank departs, Incarnate Garm picks up his trail, following his footsteps. Lost in the desolate expanse of the frozen Patreon mountains, Hank trudged forward, burdened by the weight of his past deeds. Memories of fallen comrades and their final words echoed in his mind as he collapsed onto the icy ground. Despite his exhaustion, a flicker of determination urged him to rise, reminding him of the oath he must fulfill. As he pressed on, Hank's senses tingled with an impending danger, and suddenly, he found himself under attack by another incarnate, a werewolf named Roy. A fierce battle erupted between them. Stripping Hank of his weapons with ease, Roy demanded answers, questioning Hank's refusal to align with Cain. Yet Hank stood firm, asserting his own duty to end Roy's life to fulfill his oath. Desperation fueled Hank's struggle as he resorted to grenades for cover and flees into the dense woodland. Meanwhile, Shawl and the group closed in on the mountain, desperate to save Hank despite Claude's orders to eliminate him on sight. Hidden amongst the trees, Hank nursed his wounds, loading his pistol with godcolor bullets as he sought a strategy to confront Garm without relying on his own incarnate powers. But Garm's relentless pursuit found him once more, and launches another ferocious attack. Hank, in a frantic bid for survival, aimed a blade at Garm, hoping for an opening to strike, yet found himself overpowered, as Garm deflected a bullet with ease before rendering Hank unconscious with a brutal blow. Garm tells the weakened Hank to transform and fight him in his incarnate form. However, the sun rose, rendering Hank's incarnate abilities dormant, since he can only use his incarnate powers at night. Garm departed, leaving Hank with a warning to remember his true self before their next encounter at nightfall. Claude, battling a fever, struggled between duty and concern for Hank, eventually passed out, halting their progress. Later, as Claude regained consciousness, he asks Shawl about her choice to protect the incarnates despite recognizing that they are dangerous. She responds by affirming that they did not request their fate and would have fared better with human support. She explains to Claude her aspiration to find a solution for both incarnates and humans to coexist peacefully. Just then, Gerald informs Claude of their discovery of Hank's whereabouts in the presence of an unidentified incarnate. Claude swiftly asks Gerald to gather the troops for a strategic meeting aimed at retrieving Hank and confronting the mysterious incarnate. Despite Claude's determination to set out despite his fatigue, understanding the importance of his well-being, Lisa intervenes and insists he rest, leading him to delegate command to Gerald. Upon learning of Hank's location, Shawl decided to accompany the troops in their mission. Meanwhile, under the cover of nightfall, Hank engaged in a fierce battle with Garm once more, but found himself at a disadvantage. Garm seized Hank and questioned the change in his demeanor since their last encounter. Hank rebuffed Garm's notion that incarnates should embrace their inherent nature instead of being fixated on human identity. Hank says that Garm is merely a subdued creature stripped of its dignity by Cain's manipulation. Enraged by Hank's words, Garm pierced Hank's chest, triggering a flood of memories, driving Hank to transform to his werewolf form. Much to Garm's satisfaction, The clash escalated as both monstrous entities grappled for dominance, as Hank struggles to control his unleashed power. Memories of his transformation into the colossal white wolf flooded his mind. Fear overwhelmed him, causing him to cry out, catching the attention of both the troops and Shawl. He then reverts back to his human form. Returning to his human form, Hank found himself paralyzed by fear, unable to continue the fight. Garm, consumed by rage and disappointment, delivered a fatal crushing blow that hurled Hank towards a nearby cliff. He continued relentlessly berating Hank, calling him worthless and weak. As Garm was about to deliver a final strike to Hank, the troops suddenly emerged and engaged him in combat. However, their assault inadvertently triggered a collapse of the cliff where Hank stood, causing him to fall downward. Shawl cries out to Hank as he disappears from view. Garm's memories churned like a storm as he reflected on the pivotal role Hank had played in his life. Hank, once his beacon of hope, had become something more, as an incarnate reborn from the horrors of the battlefield. With Hank by his side, Garm had felt invincible, as though he could navigate any hardship. But now, as he gazed upon the defeated figure of his friend, disappointment flooded Garm's heart. Ignoring the relentless barrage of bullets from the soldiers, he turned away, fleeing from the troops. Injured and bewildered by how the soldiers persistently hunted him down, the rest of the squad pursue Garm as they can see him with new night vision goggles. Garm refused to succumb easily. With a fierce determination, he turned the tables, launching a ferocious counterattack that threw the soldiers into disarray. Their only recourse was to call for reinforcements. Despite Lisa's protests, Claude joined the fray, driven by a desire to save his comrades and Shawl. Meanwhile, Hank found himself dreaming of Elaine in his unconscious state, only to awaken to Shawl's tender care. Astonished by her survival, Shawl recounted to Hank the harrowing events about her father, who had abruptly resurrected as a monstrous beast. In a heart-wrenching act of mercy, she was forced to confront him, shooting him with a shotgun and put an end to his rampage. Shawl finds the words to express her understanding of Hank's mission, acknowledging the complexity of his purpose in hunting down incarnates. Hank, burdened by guilt and doubt, opens up about his fears regarding his comrades' feelings towards him. He agonizes over whether they harbor resentment for the sacrifices he made on their behalf, and questions if they'll ever find it in their hearts to forgive him and receive true redemption. He laments that in his single-minded pursuit to carve a path for them and honor their oath, he inadvertently deprived them of the opportunity to savor life's simple joys. Hank knew that the more he uses his incarnate powers, the closer he edged towards the same fate that had befallen his comrades. The mere thought of becoming the dreaded king of beasts filled him with fear, envisioning the havoc he might unleash upon the world. With a sense of urgency, Hank pleaded with Shawl, asking if she would be able to end his life, should he lose control completely. However, Shawl's heart weighed heavily with sorrow at Hank's plea. Though torn by his request, she couldn't bring herself to accept. Dressed in his uniform, Hank strides purposefully toward his ultimate confrontation with Roy, his former ally turned adversary. Before departing, he implores Shawl not to forget them, even if they were to become monsters one day. With grim determination, he sets off to settle the score with his former friend. Meanwhile, Garm relentlessly assaults the soldiers but falls into their trap when he seizes Gerald. Despite warning Gerald of the consequences, the fearless leader sacrifices himself to protect his team. Surrounded by soldiers, Garm withstands their onslaught, intent on ending the general's life, until Claude's timely intervention inflicts severe damage upon him. As Shawl walks out of the cave, she reflects on Hank's struggles and resolves to protect him from the darkness consuming him. Meanwhile, Garm stands at the river's edge, weakened by blood loss. Hank approaches from the opposite bank. With deliberate intent, Hank clutches the grenade, using it as a means to draw Garm closer. But just as he's poised to embrace their mutual demise, Shar bursts onto the scene, firing a shotgun round into Garm's knee. Shawl's voice pierces the tense air, affirming Hank's humanity and pledging to end him should he lose control and transform irreversibly. Urging Hank to continue his mission, she implores him to honor his oath and fight until the very end. Her words breathe new life into Hank, kindling a spark of hope in his heart. He realizes that what he truly craves is not death, but solace and companionship. Hank relinquishes the grenade. As Garm evades Shawl's shot and charges towards her, Hank morphs into his werewolf form once more, engaging Garm under Shawl's vigilant gaze. As the two clash, Hank embraces his werewolf form and engaged Garm in a ferocious battle. Ultimately, Hank delivers the final blow to Garm, who praises Hank's skill before returning to his human form. In his final moments, Garm acknowledges Hank's leadership, In a fleeting exchange, they reminisce about their shared past on the battlefield, prompting Hank to thank him before delivering the decisive shot. Following Roy's passing, Shawl queries Hank to tell her about Roy's past because she wants to remember the kind of person he was. Hank reminisces, describing Roy as the spirited member of their squad, dedicated to their missions, suggesting that under different circumstances, he and Shawl might have been friends. The soldiers had finally pinpointed Kane's stronghold nestled within the rugged terrain of Bold Creek. A week passed, and news of this discovery reached the ears of the president, who wastes no time issuing a directive to bring down the fortress at any cost. With the president's orders echoing in their ears, soldiers mobilized, marking the dawn of a new conflict. Amidst the chaos, Hank found himself ensnared by the soldiers and subjected to interrogation by Claude. The air crackled with tension as Claude probed Hank for information about the remaining incarnates, stunned to learn that Hank knows he is Kane's younger brother. In a tense exchange, Hank disavowed any knowledge of Kane's treachery, but offered a glimmer of hope, claiming to possess the key to ending Kane's threat. Claude's skepticism threatened to escalate into violence until Shawl intervened, advocating for cooperation between Hank and Claude since they have a shared purpose. Despite Claude's apprehension about Hank's potential for violence, Shawl vowed to prevent Hank from triggering another Whitekirch incident, pledging to intervene should he teeter on the brink of losing control. Their deliberations were abruptly interrupted by the arrival of Gerald, bearing a presidential order to march on Bold Creek and confront Kane's forces head-on. With newfound resolve, Claude and his troops set out, forging an unlikely alliance with Hank in their quest to vanquish Kane. Upon reaching their destination, Claude, Gerald, and Hank sought an audience with the colonel overseeing the operation. The colonel revealed their dire predicament, besieged by relentless long-range assaults from the incarnate sniper, known as the Centaurus, hindering their advance towards the fortress. Hank proposed a night raid, offering himself as bait to draw out Miles, the Centaurus. As darkness descended, tension mounted as soldiers braced themselves for the impending clash. Hank's strategic insight proved invaluable, because even Miles could not accurately snipe in the dark. Miles emerged from the shadows, wreaking havoc among the ranks. With nerves strained taut, Hank orchestrated a trap, ensnaring Miles and subjecting him to a hail of bullets. Although Miles was shot, his inexplicable resilience defied their expectations, as his wounds suddenly healed up. He claims to have attained immortality before vanishing into the night. As dawn broke, the army pressed onward, digging trenches and fortifying their positions and preparing for the onslaught ahead. Despite lingering uncertainties and whispers of sightings of another mysterious incarnate, the soldiers braced themselves for the inevitable confrontation, driven by a singular purpose to bring Kane's fortress crashing down, whatever the cost. The colonel explains that his men thought they saw a second incarnate fighting Miles, but he laughed it off. Later, Miles tends to a soldier's injured arm. He is acknowledged with gratitude. Kane, observing the scene, finds amusement in Miles's actions, to which Miles casually remarks that he used to be a doctor. He sees no contradiction in now being a soldier, whether he aids the wounded or engages the enemy. He receives thanks either way. From his perspective, dispatching foes is a swifter endeavor. Under the night sky, Shawl and Hank engage in a conversation by the crackling fire, their exchange stirring memories of their first encounter and evoking laughter from Hank, showing how much he has opened up. Hank finds reassurance in Shawl's words, as she tells him to endure until the very end. With the sun's first light, the long-awaited moment arrived, signaled by the commander's directive to launch the assault. Despite the relentless barrage of enemy cannons, Northern soldiers charged forward, fueled by Hank's unwavering resolve and rallying cries. Facing fierce opposition from the fortress's defenders, the Northerners pressed on, engaging in a deadly exchange of cannon fire. As dusk approached, they reached the fortress's base, prompting a brief pause in the conflict. Vigilant for any sign of Miles, Hank's apprehension proved warranted as Miles launches a surprise attack, unleashing a barrage of arrows upon the unsuspecting soldiers. Despite valiant efforts to halt his advance, Miles proved a formidable foe, shooting down Northern soldiers with ease. However, the tables turned as the soldiers lured Miles into a cunning trap, incapacitating him with a well-timed maneuver. Seizing the opportunity, Hank unleashed a devastating blow with the spear bomb, severing Miles's right arm. In a chilling exchange, Hank declares that the doctor within Miles had perished long ago. Yet, Miles's laughter echoed defiance, claiming that on the contrary, his transformation into an incarnate had resurrected the healer within him. Miles recalls his days as a battlefield surgeon, where he diligently worked to save wounded soldiers, only for them to return to the front lines, where many met their end. This experience left him disillusioned, questioning the purpose of his efforts. Upon being assigned to the Incarnates, he transitioned to a role where he actively engaged in the killing of enemy soldiers, believing killing one enemy would save 1,000 soldiers. He concluded this was the right course. Miles's severed arm miraculously regenerated, a sinister grin adorning his face as he reveled in the agonized cries of his victims, callously desecrating a fallen soldier. As the sun set, Hank transformed into his werewolf form, stating that Miles has lost his sanity, and the two Incarnates clash. Witnessing this unfolding spectacle, the Colonel issued a discreet command for his men to unleash the secret weapon. Unfazed by the chaos, the Colonel calmly confided in Claude, telling him that he is aware of Hank's true identity. Meanwhile, amidst a fierce confrontation, Hank engages in a relentless battle with Miles. Hank seizes a moment to disarm Miles, delivering a forceful slam that pins him to the ground. Exploiting this opportunity, Hank drives a spear into Miles's chest, rendering him immobile. With precision, Hank signals the general, who launches a flare, prompting a bombardment on their location. As explosions ravage the area, decimating Miles's body, he miraculously regenerates his limbs once more. Hank, determined to end the conflict, readies a god-killing bullet, only to have his plans disrupted by a sudden encroachment of purple mist, identified as Abby's poison. The lethal mist dissolves Miles's healed body into purple bubbles, prompting Hank to shield himself from its effects. Amidst the chaos, Hank urges his fellow soldiers to evacuate while the Colonel reveals that the poison was obtained from Hydra's corpse, sanctioned by the President. As Miles's body rapidly disintegrates, he exchanges final words with Hank before being dispatched by the god-killing bullet. However, their respite is short-lived as Kane arrives, effortlessly dispatching soldiers with eerie abilities. Kane targets the Colonel and Claude, prompting frantic attempts at defense, but to no avail. As the Colonel succumbs to Abby's poison, Claude, trembling with fear, intervenes, only to become the target of Kane's manipulation. Hank's timely intervention disrupts Kane's plans momentarily, leading to a confrontation where Kane unveils a larger scheme of capturing and taking over the South. Dismissing Kane's proposal as an invasion, Claude stands firm. Kane accuses humans of unreliability and blames them for the chaos, citing Elaine's death as an example. However, Hank, understanding human fallibility, resolves to carry on Elaine's legacy despite Kane's objections. Kane, defiant, asserts his autonomy, setting the stage for a continuation of the conflict. As Hank bore witness to Kane's descent into madness, he transformed into his incarnate form, emitting a bone-chilling roar that reverberated across the surrounding mountains. Hank launched himself at Kane, claws slashing through the air, only to find Kane's wounds healing instantly, rendering his attacks futile. Despite Kane's taunts urging him to embrace darkness, Hank remained resolute, refusing to succumb. In a desperate move, he seized Kane's head and exerted all his strength, resulting in a sinister red mist enveloping the area, from which multiple clones of Kane emerged, forming an army that surrounded Hank. Battling against the onslaught, Hank fought back valiantly, but the relentless attacks took their toll as he reverted to his human form. Weakened and battered by his injuries, Kane capitalized on his vulnerability, striking him and urging him to join their cause. As the northern soldiers seized control of the fortress and sunlight bathed the scene, Hank, supported by Shawl, resisted Kane's entreaties, remembering his oath to protect humanity. Seeing this, Kane couldn't shake the feeling of dissatisfaction that lingered within him, a silent burden he carried with him. The realization of Elaine's dependence on Hank had become a persistent thorn in his side, casting a shadow over their relationship that he couldn't seem to dispel. Kane tried to attack Shawl, but Hank intervened, asserting that there was no place for Kane's vision of domination. He unleashes his unknown awakened power and delivered a powerful blow to Kane, knocking him to the ground. Upon learning that the Northern Army had seized control of the fortress, Kane informed Hank and Shawl that the conflict was far from over. He says that they would encounter each other once more on a different battleground before vanishing, with Kane asserting control over the western and southern regions of New Patria. Seeing this, the president issued a call for troops to retreat to the capital, signaling a final stand against the encroaching threat. As Hank and Shawl prepared to depart from the fortress, Lisa assured Shawl that they would continue to support her and Hank. Seeing off Hank and Shawl on their journey, Lisa and the soldiers bid them farewell. Meanwhile, Claude and Gerald recognized the necessity of enlisting Hank and Shawl's assistance in combating the Incarnates who had lost their humanity. Reflecting on Shawl's evolution since their initial encounter, Hank was struck by how much she had changed. Shawl, acknowledging her own transformation, reassures Hank of her readiness for the challenges ahead. Hank asks her if she is prepared for the struggles that will befall them. Shawl affirmed that she had discovered her purpose and was mentally ready to stand by Hank's side in fulfilling the promises they had made to each other. Somewhere in Patria, Kane stands before a Elaine body, encased in a glass tube. The fluid within the container hints at a lingering semblance of life. She seems to be trapped in a state of suspended animation and deep unconsciousness. Holding a somnium crystal in his hand, Kane gazes upon Elaine's body, and he foretells the imminent arrival of the new world she had sought to dismantle with her own hands.